Hello, and welcome to the interview series for the Nonfiction Authors Association. Today's session is with Janna Maron, and we will be talking about how to finally finish your book, 3 Shifts to Make It Happen. I'm Carla King, your host, and I'm happy to have you with us today. This event lasts up to 30 minutes, and recordings are available on all of our Nonfiction Authors Association social media channels, and we'd especially like for you to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you're new to us, our members receive our author advisor email every Friday featuring curated media leads and links to exclusive member content. Members can also participate in free mastermind groups we call the Author Brainstorm Exchange and get access to our private community on Facebook too. Discounts are available for our year-round Nonfiction Book Awards program, the annual Nonfiction Writers Conference, and our book marketing and book publishing master courses, both with which offer optional professional certification. And we can't forget discounts with our awesome partners, including Lulu, Findaway Voices, Office Depot, Ingram Spark, and others. Finally, we'd love for you to join us at nonfictionauthorsassociation.com. And now I'd like to introduce our guest. Janna Maron is a professional editor with nearly 20 years of experience helping writers to complete their projects and produce the best work possible. Her experience includes time as a magazine editor, college professor, agency or editorial director, and content director for a popular internet brand. She's worked with authors on everything from self-published Amazon bestsellers to traditionally published New York Times bestsellers. She's also the founding editor and publisher of Under the Gum Tree, a literary arts magazine that publishes creative nonfiction and visual art. You can find out more about Janna at www.moretothestory.co. Hi, Janna. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Yes. And okay, we're talking about how to finally finish your book, 3 shifts to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And I've been there. We've all been there. We tinker with our books so much, rewrite chapter 1 50 times, get caught up in copy editing and formatting our Word doc. Probably you're going to tell us not to do that, right? Perhaps we should start there. What are a few things that prevent us from finishing the work? Things we shouldn't be doing, warning signs that we're wasting time.
Yeah, those all are really good examples of things that you rattled off, things that we often find ourselves just kind of like feeling like, oh, I'm working on my manuscript, but it's not really true productive work and moving it forward toward completion. So there's 3 things that I see frequently in the writers that I work with. And the first is they often will look for something that they feel like is going to fix their manuscript or book project, feeling like if they just go to this one conference or this one workshop or work with this one author, they're always looking for something external that's going to solve what's ever happening with their project. And really what I've found is that the shifts that I teach, they're internal. So they're often like, let's turn the gaze inward and find out what's going on mentally, maybe even spiritually, to find out what's keeping us from getting our book done. Another thing is writers often get hung up on structure. They want to know what the structure of their manuscript is going to be. And that is important. Yes, it's absolutely important. But when I work with writers, I tell them, don't focus on it so much. Don't fixate on it. It will come if you trust yourself, if you trust the process. The structure will reveal itself. And sometimes it's the last thing that clicks. You have all of this material and you have to spend time just kind of futzing around and moving things around and playing with the work until it clicks. And a lot of the work that I do is really just helping writers learn to trust themselves and the project and the process and their work and let the structure kind of arise out of that. And then the last thing I see is we can't believe everything we think about our work. And that's a mindset piece. I know you're going to ask me about that too. So I won't say too much more about it, but we have to be intentional about that mindset because often mental barriers are the biggest things that are just preventing us from getting the work done.
That's right. And we hear that term bandied about a lot, the term mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, with our writing, it's particularly difficult, I think, because it's so personal. Well, so can you just explain what you mean by mindset here and how do we turn it on or turn it around?
Mm-hmm, sure. When I say mindset, I'm talking about the way we speak to ourselves. So it's always about self-talk. And in this case, I have a very meta mantra that I use. And that is the story I tell myself creates the reality that I experience. And I got that from my therapist years ago. And he was tickled to pieces because as a writer, he told me, you understand how stories work and you understand how to construct stories. You understand the power of stories. So this is about being aware of the story that we're telling ourselves about the story we're writing. So it's very meta, like I said, and we can change that story. It's something that I learned how to do, where I just started treating my thoughts as sentences that I'm writing, and even just writing them down on the page and then editing the sentences, literally crossing out words, changing words, so that that story I'm telling myself turns into something that's actually helpful and useful, instead of, oh, this sucks, this is no good, I can't do this, I don't have the talent, whatever is the story that we are telling ourselves about our work.
So were you saying that you're actually writing down a story about yourself here?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
what does that look like?
Yeah. So as soon as I hear that kind of internal voice in my head, it doesn't happen instantly. This is an ongoing practice, and some days I'm better at it than others. I'll just think to myself, oh, I just told myself that I'm never going to figure this out. I've been working on this piece in my manuscript, and I just told myself I'm never going to figure this out. So let me actually write that sentence down. And I write the words, I'm never going to figure this out. And as an editor, I feel I have a little bit of an advantage, because I'll even use a little old school editor, cross out curly Q mark to replace a word, like, I will figure this out, or I will eventually figure this out. Whatever it is that makes it feel like something I can own in the moment. Because sometimes I'm going to figure this out feels too like I'm not quite there yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I could edit it a little bit closer to home and say, I haven't figured it out yet, but I will. So just kind of playing around with the words, just like we would in any piece of quote unquote real or craft writing that we're doing.
Got it. That's interesting. Thank you for that example.
Mm-hmm.
And it really illustrates our internal dialogue and paying, attending to that,
Mm-hmm.
the little voice about our abilities, and especially, for nonfiction authors, about our own authority,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who are we to write this book, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's memoir or business book or
Mm-hmm.
philosophy, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So turning that off is super important. I think we all know that. And that tool, again, about writing it down, that's a great exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So that's self-talk. Now, what about others? How important is the way we speak to others about our work?
Oh my gosh, it's huge, because often you're speaking to others about your work the same way, or even worse, than you're talking to yourself. Because we'll be in these conversations, like describing our book project or whatever, and say something like, well, I don't really know if anybody's going to want to read this, or I don't really know how relevant it is. I had a client last year who came to me with that was her story. I don't really feel like this is very relevant. She was writing about the consumer culture, and a year of no buying with her family that she did. And she felt like, is it relevant now, given what we've been through with the pandemic and such? And really what we worked on was, we worked on getting her manuscript done, but we also worked on, how is she speaking about her work? How is she seeing ways that it is relevant, that it does connect with readers who are different from, another story that is common is, well, there's already hundreds of books out there on this topic. Who's going to want to read mine, right? Why should I write? Why should I write and finish this book? Because there's already however many books on the same topic. Well, we have to start to learn and understand that no one's going to write about it the same way you are going to write about it. And there are things about you and your unique perspective and story that will connect with readers differently than all those other books, and really coming to terms with that and owning that and being confident in that. And that client who I was just talking about, she finished her manuscript with me, submitted to a small press manuscript contest, won that contest, and now her book is published.
Excellent. Got it. So she called in you as a pro. A lot of us struggle along all by ourselves for way too long. We do use writing groups and critique partners and beta readers if we know how to find them. Mm-hmm. But when is it time to pay for a coach or a developmental editor?
I think you can do it sooner than most people think or expect. I think there's a lot of kind of maybe general consensus around, oh, you have to have a complete manuscript to go and hire an editor because you want to deliver them your complete manuscript. But the wonderful thing about a developmental editor, especially, is that word developmental, that means we are developing the book and the manuscript with you, including the idea and how to best frame it, what information to include. Especially if you have a manuscript where you feel like you've been stuck or it's not quite done, developmental editor can come in and say, oh, here's where I see these gaps. Here's where I see opportunities to expand. Have you ever thought about including XYZ? I really feel like that might be a missing component to what you're working on. So you don't have to have a complete manuscript to work with a developmental editor. In fact, I've worked with several clients before they've even started writing. They had the book concept, and they come to me, and one of the other benefits of a developmental editor is you have a thought partner while you are writing your book, someone who you can go to and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. How does that sound? And they can reflect back to you and even expand on those ideas and kind of give you some direction or guidance in how to go about framing that and shaping it. So I definitely get two kinds of clients. The first is they've been working on a manuscript for years and years and years by themselves. They feel stuck. They feel like they're never going to finish. And then we come in there and come alongside them, do all the things that I was just describing about what it's like to work with a developmental editor, but also just providing some structure around, okay, send me 30,000 words by this deadline. And you're going to get intense feedback on that bulk of material, do some revision, send me another 30,000 words by this deadline. And by the end of it, we ideally have a complete draft. And then the second type of client I get is benefiting from that same structure, but starting with little or no material generated.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. So we covered the three mindsets. I mean, the three
shifts.
Why don't you go over the three shifts?
Yeah, one more time? Sure. So the three shifts that I teach are to embrace structure, and structure in this context is not your book structure. It's structure for your life and your schedule. And a lot of creatives often will kind of cringe when they hear that word structure because they want to engage in their creative process when they feel like it or when they're inspired. And the problem with that is it's reactionary. It's not consistent. It's not sustainable. So you don't see consistent progress unless you really are establishing a structure for yourself. The second shift is to love your story. And that really does encompass that mindset stuff we were talking about, because if you love your story, you wouldn't talk about it probably the way that you typically talk about how nobody's going to want to read it or care about it, right? And then the third shift is to create a sanctuary. And this is kind of, when I teach this framework, it's a pyramid and it's layered. And so the sanctuary stuff is really more top of the pyramid layers around creating some rituals, cultivating that creativity. So you're cross-training your brain and engaging in other types of creative activities that are not just words and writing, and taking care of your wellness so that you are in the best physical condition you can be to quote unquote perform, similar to athletes, but our performance is solitary and mental when we're engaging with words on the page. So that's kind of a very high level summary of my 3 shifts framework.
Got it. And I'm thinking that your exercise about writing down and editing your intention and talking to others, how to talk to others about your book is part of that overall bigger framework.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about what you do. But before we dive into that, are there any other little tips you might want to share with us?
So the main thing is the work that I do with writers is all about helping them and supporting them in figuring out what works for them, figure out what works for you, and learning to trust yourself and your process. There really isn't any prescription for being successful other than figuring out what works for you and trusting that. You know, we often hear like, oh, so-and-so writer does XYZ, so I have to do that. Or, you know, the common kind of myth is if you don't get up and write every day at 5 a.m. first thing before the sun, you're not a real writer, whatever. You know, I really think that's kind of bullshit. Hope that's okay for me to say. And we get ourselves kind of wrapped up in, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, when it's like, no, there are no shoulds here. What works for you? Trust yourself, trust your process.
Right. And I know you're also a magazine editor. So I just wanted to throw this in. How important is it for authors to start sharing their work in little pieces ahead of publication date? That's not only a promotional tool, but it could also be a confidence building tool, do you think?
Sure. I get this question a lot, and I really don't have a preference, to be honest, because as far as I'm concerned, it goes back to what I was just saying about what works for you and trust the process. I'm someone who hasn't been able to manage both my book length manuscript and short form submitting to literary publications or other types of magazine publications, primarily because it takes a different kind of mental approach for me to work on short form versus long form. So I had to choose what's my priority, and my priority has been my book manuscript. And that's kind of how I explain things to my clients too. Like, if you feel like you can do both, then great, do both. But if not, make your book your priority and don't feel bad or guilty about not submitting and not publishing. Yes, it can be a way to kind of build your platform or get exposure or whatever, all those things, but you can finish your book manuscript, get it to a place where you're happy with it. And then you can shift gears and prioritize maybe taking parts of the manuscript, shaping them, getting them ready for submitting to magazines for publishing.
Right. And I know a lot of people also feel pressured to start a blog and share their writing there, especially nonfiction authors, possibly not memoir, but business authors are kind of a lot of them are all about that, right? They're building their business with a book. You know, I've known nonfiction authors to blog their book, right? And that's how they get it out there, right? In little pieces. So that is a huge body of work that you might look at as an editor and go, okay, what belongs in the book?
Right. And I have done that for clients in the past, where we start with a ton of blog content. Not all of it is necessarily relevant for books. Sometimes what happens is we can use, the book itself ends up being comprised of maybe like 2/3 of content from the blog, but then there is still some material that needs to be generated new and fresh for the book. I think that's a good practice regardless, because especially if you have an audience that's been following you and reading everything on your blog, and then they get your book and they're like, oh, there's nothing new in here. You do want to have something that's a little fresh and new for readers in a book.
That's true. And I've heard people say, well, I don't want to read the whole blog anyway. It's backwards. It's all messed up. So, you know, putting it in book form is nice for them, especially if, you know, they really like the author and they really help them. Yeah, I'm kind of a blogger, so I like that idea. But it's travel, and I think business bloggers are helped too. What would you say for memoirists?
About the blogging question,
Well, about the
or
sharing ahead of time. Yeah, yeah. I know that's a tough question. I threw you a
yeah.
left curve there. Because there are several kinds of memoir. I mean, mine are adventure travel memoirs, which are a little easier, than
Mm-hmm.
something like a healing memoir
Mm-hmm.
or but there are also business memoirs and career memoirs too.
Yeah, or like more kind of like hybrid prescriptive personal story combination where they're using their personal story as a teaching tool or a way to show readers, here's what I did and here's how you can do it too, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, so for memoir, I think it can go work similarly where even if you're not ready to or comfortable sharing your personal story that you're writing about for the book, maybe there are lessons or takeaways or kind of like how to's that you've learned and developed out of your personal experience that can be the thing that you share publicly and still save the personal in depth, maybe more intense story for the book. Does that answer the
Exactly.
question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And I suppose that is when somebody would call you and go, Janna, help me figure out what I should share and how what belongs in my healing memoir or any book. So why don't
Yeah.
you just tell us about your book and your services and how you help authors and remind us also how to find you online.
Sure, sure. Thank you for asking about my book. It's still in the works, but the working title is So I Married an Atheist. It is a memoir. It's my journey of being raised as an evangelical Christian and marrying an atheist, which is a big no-no in the Christian culture. And along the way, I ended up being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So there's some, just addressing the spiritual journey and the emotional traumas of indoctrination that can happen in a culture like evangelicalism. Um, so that's my book in progress. And then the work that I do is supporting women working on book projects to get their manuscripts complete. So I do focus on getting the manuscript complete. And then once that's complete, there is additional support for helping them figure out next steps, whatever they want to do to pursue publishing. That's with my company, More to the Story. And our main offering there is a 12-month program, which is a combination of coaching and editing. And we've had clients, like I said, with my client example, who finished her book, submitted to a contest, won the contest, and now her book is published. I've also had clients sign with agents, and then several others winning or placing as finalists in manuscript contests. So that's really exciting for us. All the information about that is online at moretothestory.co. And then with Under the Gum Tree, you mentioned the magazine in my intro. Thank you for mentioning that as well. We publish creative nonfiction and visual art quarterly, and we are open for submission. So learning about how to do that is at underthegumtree.com.
Wow, I know so many people who are going to be thrilled, and you're going to get a bunch, an influx of stories and art, especially too. So
Thank
thank
you.
you for that. And your
Yes.
book sounds fascinating. I'm sorry about the MS. It's just like, but this is the thing that we need to share.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's such a compelling topic.
Thank
We
you.
want to know how
Thank you.
that turns out.
Thank you so much. I am in remission, and it's been 10 years, almost exactly 10 years since my diagnosis. So I am managing it. It is in remission, but I include that in the little kind of synopsis of the book when I talk about it, because I do believe that emotional trauma can manifest physically in the body. And that's part of what I explore in my book.
Wow, great. Janna, what multifaceted podcast interview here. I really appreciate you being on for us, and thanks for being our guest today.
Oh, thank you, Carla. It's been so wonderful.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We conduct these interviews every Wednesday. You can check the schedule or sign up for a mailing list to get notifications. or go to our YouTube channel and subscribe there, and join us at nonfictionauthorsassociation.com. See you again.